conversation with our guests. First, I would like to, as we say, ladies first. So I would like to ask Hamutenya Hamwaala to unmute her mic and just give us a very brief intro about who you are, what your institution is about for those that do not know, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you, moderator. My name is Hamutenya Hamwaala. I'm a Deputy Director for Namibia Library and Archive Service, and also a Chairperson for National Information Workers Association of Namibia. So the National Information Workers Association of Namibia, formerly known as Namibia Information Workers Association, was established in 1990. And maybe just to say, I'm here today in my capacity as a Chairperson of the National Information Workers Association. So it was established in 1990 to promote the development of the information professions and information services in Namibia by coordinating the efforts of information workers in the promotion of the information services. So the association has been supporting information professions on various programs and projects that are related to access and provision of information in the country. So briefly, that's who I am. Thank you, moderator.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I would like to introduce next Mr. Patrick Sam, the Chairperson of the National Arts Council of Namibia. Patrick, are you there?
Yes, I am, Harry. Thank you very much to Goethe as well as to you for moderating the session. My name is Patrick Sam. I am the Chairperson of the National Art Council of Namibia, which is an Act of Parliament of 2005. It's a National Art Fund Act of 2005, and I've been in the position for the last 5 years at my second term. Our mandate is basically to unlock the creative potential of the nation and to ensure that we finance arts organizations, projects, and individuals. I also represent Namibia and the African continent on the International Federation of Art Councils and Cultural Agencies, also known as IFICA, which is a international federation constituted of about 70 public institutions, so art councils from around the world. And I chair the African chapter, which is constituted of 12 members from the African continent, basically primarily focusing on public investment and the effects that public investment have in terms of the promotion, preservation of arts, culture, and heritage.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Patrick. It's very exciting to have you here. And the last person I'm going to introduce, and this is for people who are not necessarily in the previous session, Jürgen Sieck, if you, Professor Jürgen Sieck, if you don't mind reintroducing yourself.
Okay, Harry, thank you very much. Once again, introduction. I'm Professor of Computer Science in 2 countries on 2 different continents. The first position is at the University of Applied Science in Berlin, and the second, the Namibia University of Science and Technology. Both are universities, and we have 2 main tasks. The first task is to educate young students. My task, of course, in computer science, but also in mechanical engineering, in languages, in electrical engineering, in philosophy, and. So, and the second task is doing research for a good future. And me personally, I would like to combine both directions to one general thing. That means putting research and education together in the field of computer science. The main focus I have with my group is computer science in art and culture. And that is not only for me good, it's also good for the students because they are involved in the projects. They can go together with the family to a museum or buy a book and show how to bring the book to life. And that is their work. They can show their work they do during their study. And hopefully at the end, they are better than me and work for a better future, for a better life. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. And these are and that's a very interesting approach, you know, combining arts, culture, philosophy with mechanical engineering and computer science. Before the pandemic, that would have seemed like a far-fetched stretch or a very unnecessary or weird combination, kind of like, I don't know, maybe peanut butter and mayonnaise. But we will get into that, and I'm sure it will prove to be more fruitful than that analogy I just gave. I want to go back to Hamutenya. In terms of what you do and in your sector, when the pandemic hit, what were the main challenges you faced?
Thank you for the question. Like I said, we work with information workers. So most of our members are the government libraries, and that includes a network of 66 public libraries, 14 special libraries, and 503 school libraries, the National Library, National Archives of Namibia, and then the academic libraries like the University of Namibia, NACN, and IUM. So what we have done during the pandemic is that we have reviewed how COVID-19 impacted the provision of services at both government, special, national archives and record center in Namibia. So the finding was that the main challenge that we have faced is actually the provision of access to physical resources, and those are books, because we serve students and public members, and by that time most of the libraries were closed. So these people had no access to physical resources that are at the libraries and the national archives. So what we have done by then, we try to promote the usage of electronic resources that the libraries have subscribed to. And luckily, some of these institutions had good collection of electronic resources by that time. And one good thing also is that, the service providers where we procure electronic resources have made some resources freely accessible during that time. Now, the second challenge that we have faced is that, as much as we wanted to provide access to electronic resources, some of the library users, more in particular students, did not have access to proper internet for them to do their work as they want. And this was more even true in rural areas. So with most of the libraries that have Wi-Fi, we have, or the Ministry of Education in particular has informed the nation that, the Wi-Fi connection will be on so that, users can have access to internet within the proximity of libraries, so using their own devices. And also the challenge of having own computers. Most of learners do not have computers, they don't have smartphones to access these resources. So some of them have to travel to internet cafe, those ones that were open by then, to submit their assignments. So the provision of access or access to information was really limited in that way. Thank you.
Just before I move on to the next panelist, you had mentioned that, okay, in the first challenge you talked about the access to physical resources. You mentioned that some institutions had a good collection of resources. Was this an initiative that was already started before the pandemic, or was it during the pandemic that it was sparked and was just very efficient at getting its act together?
That initiative was already there before pandemic. Academic libraries and public libraries have subscribed to some electronic resources already before the pandemic. But then the usage was so limited because, most of us, we still prefer, to have a physical book. So a university like NAST or UNAM and IUM, their collections of e-resources is good as we speak, and it has been good before the pandemic. but then it was also enhanced after the pandemic, just to make sure that, you know, students don't suffer.
I guess they say necessity is the mother of all innovation. So when that need came about, you know, not being able to access things physically, then the value of digitalized material became, you know, elevated.
Yeah.
That's what you're, yeah, wonderful.
Yes.
Mr. Patrick Sam, as an artist myself in some weird capacities, one of the frustrations that we had was the fact that as artists, we relied on physical, how do I say, physical presence. We had to be in front of audiences. If I was a painter, I'd need my things or my art exhibition to be seen in a gallery. If I'm a musician, yes, there are streaming platforms and music that we can sell in radio stations. However, as an artist, I would make more money from doing gigs and performances. As public speakers, we did engagements and so on and so forth. What sort of challenges did you face and how did you come about resolving some of them?
That's a $1 trillion question. I think, I think besides the reality of artists and cultural practitioners, let's just kind of like put it into a greater context, right? And to determine what the clash is. Our mandate is basically to say, okay, Harry, you as an artist, you have a project, we have a criteria, and we're going to give fuel to your vehicle so that you get to the destinations that you desire, right? So fundamentally, like our role is to give art organizations fuel, projects fuel, and individuals fuel from a national perspective, countrywide in all 14 regions, right? With a limited amount of budget. So the first thing that happens is at a global level, there's a pandemic. And what happens as the narrative is that we need to save lives, right? So the first thing that was kind of prioritized was globally, how many artists succumbed themselves towards, you know, the conditions of the pandemic, whether they had pre-existing conditions, whether it was, so the whole national effort as a public institution globally was to save lives. Now, the question then later on became at what cost? And then the issue of livelihoods became very apparent, right? And then it started shifting between really these two extremes of, are we saving lives? Does saving lives mean neglecting livelihoods? Does increasing access to livelihoods mean that there's increased infection? So I think it's very important to not isolate and have an outdated conversation about the new paradigms that have shifted hugely. You know, just to give you a context, politically people said that up until this point, military leaders had the most power, but for the first time in the global history, health officials, health ministers, health bodies had the most power in terms of controlling where people were, what they had to do when they are there. And so I think that the greater external environment is very essential to this very conversation, and particularly to how technology comes to play. So the challenges were that the supply and demand. Our industry, largely, we supply the arts, the culture, the heritage, and what that transcends to is some form of fulfillment, and the market pays for it. Market pays tickets for it. People go buy clothes with it. People go buy paintings. People, you know, explore the diverse expressions, go to dance shows. They themselves take classes. So in terms of art, formal and informal education. So there's a whole sector and industry here, right? That is largely dependent on the market. Now, when the market fell away, three things became very apparent. One, at a macro and a national level, we realized that we don't necessarily have the right infrastructure, whether that's digital infrastructure or physical infrastructure, that is, for instance, open spaces, places that people can still be protected, their lives and livelihoods. So that concept became very apparent. Now, in the reality of that, we realized there's no infrastructure at a macro level, there's limited skills at that level, and there's limited financing opportunities. For instance, access to collateral opportunities, even artists viewing themselves as startups or looking at themselves as SMEs and then taking opportunities from other entrepreneurial opportunities that are prevailed in the country. You know, so those are the macro challenges. Now, this is very interesting, right? If you look at our sector being competitive to other sectors like logistics, transport, tourism, what you realize is we were the only sector, and it wasn't directly through the Ministry of Finance, but it was through the Ministry of Education, where the Art Council wrote position papers and policy briefs to say, you know what, the market is so important to us, and now that the market is being brought to a halt, we need additional support. And what we did was convince the executive director and the minister to give us 5 million to distribute towards artists. Now, that was the only subsector support. Somebody in agriculture didn't get access to a loan just because they were in agriculture directly because of COVID. Now, the question was, were we trying to save the lives of artists, or were we trying to save the livelihoods? Now, our mandate was to promote artworks and not necessarily promote the lives of artists, because that, is the government mandate. But as the Art Council, the challenge of providing fuel, financing, that we were able to do. And then the question becomes at a very grassroots level, Harry, when especially in the digital space, is the funding that is available, who is it available to? Who has access towards, these digital platforms? How do we utilize them? For instance, are we able to monetize? And does it create a dignity for decent work for artists? I think that's the big conversation. Back to you.
Wonderful. And I just want to throw just a very quick question back at you. So, looking at it from how you from the context that you brought it, I couldn't help but also wonder, the role of artists in the pandemic. What the type of role they would play, either by offering encouragement or lifting up people's spirits and things like that, which admittedly is one of the things that also became something of importance, because all of a sudden everybody is more sensitive and aware about mental health, so on and so forth. And in fact, there were challenges where people were saying, if you don't think artists are important, go 1 week without engaging with them, meaning turn off your radio, do not listen to music, do not watch TV, because these content creators are such an intricate part of your life without you even realizing it. So with that said, would you say that the Namibian artists need to get some form of education to understand their value so that they can step into those entrepreneurial opportunities and so on and so forth?
I think the question is, I think it's, like the idea of the blame game. I think it's more about promoting a shared responsibility game, right? So good seeds don't grow in bad soil, right? But a bad seed can grow in good soil. So essentially, the focus, especially from a public institution, must be on the soil. Is the environment that's creating enabling before you can even get into questioning, what is the responsibility of artists? And I think we, as the Art Council and other public institutions, have a greater mandate. But I think the responsibility ultimately lies in Namibian society that values arts, culture, and heritage, right? Because a lot of the times we focus on a supply side. Can we supply our diamonds? Can we supply our artists? Can we supply our music? Can we supply our plays? But the question is, who's demanding these things? And at what value are they demanding these things? So when people have, and that's part of the big conversation is, there's quality content online for free. You want to go on an artist from the physical direct contact to the online digital space. Now in doing that, if people have lost jobs and their disposable income has decreased, who is going to buy art, right? So this idea of also just art being there for commercial purposes, but also how do we create lives and livelihoods around it is a societal conversation that needs to be had. So for me right now, it's more asking the questions of who's demanding art, how much are they willing to put down, because it's a give and take relationship. So how much are people willing to take from artists and how much are they willing to give? But I think the value of that is not in a sector or in an industry, but I think it's in society.
Patrick, I know I turned on my camera and inside I'm giving you a thunderous standing ovation, but this is not about my views on how the fan culture needs to be cultivated so that we do have that good soil to support our art and culture. Thank you very much. And I think that's a conversation for another day. Jürgen, I would love to hear how your crazy idea of putting peanut butter and mayonnaise in one sandwich, and which is the technology side of things, as well as the culture and art aspect. First, before you even into what challenges you faced and how you got to mitigate and what sort of innovations came forward, what on earth were you thinking to even have that combination?
Difficult to answer.
Okay.
But Harry, let me start in the following way. If you ask the computer scientist, can you do something for me? Can you do this and this? Yes, I can everything. And all the computer science students and also graduates think we can solve every problem. That follows to the point that they solve problems no one has. And then they are, yes, I have a solution. Who has that problem? I have the solution for. So, and that's why I go with my students to other disciplines, to engineers, to museum staff, to musicians, and ask what problems they have. And then we figure out, yes, now we have the use case. Now we have the problem. Now we have the people providing content. And then let's work together with them. And sometimes we add a designer. Sometimes we add a person is very good in dealing with music, not only playing, mixing everything together and so on. So, and then at the end, we have a real nice application for a problem. Hopefully, a lot of people have, at least one person has. So, and then at the end, I can do the same in the health industry for our hospital. But for me, I choose better a place where I can enjoy my work, my life, than another one. I can go to SAP, that is a big company doing computer science in the field of business. So then I'm more a business people. That does not so much fun. So we have a new computer science course that is computer science in health and culture. And you say, hey, computer science and health and culture, that is totally different. No, from the field of, or from the view of a computer science test, it is not different. If you are in front of a nice memorial, you want to know who is that? That is just in front of the Independence Museum. That is Sam Nujoma. Sam Nujoma was the first president here and here and here. And you have a lot of facts about his life. So go to the hospital, be a medical doctor, go to a room and seeing there is Harry in the bed. Yeah, he has fever, 30 degrees. He had this medicine. Yes, we changed that a little bit. So that means have access to the information just in front of an object. The object could be a person in a hospital, that can be a piece of art in a museum, that can be a car. You have to maintenance for that. So from the point of a computer scientist, is this the same? So, and I had to choose the different application, and I decided myself, enjoy the life. And some of my colleagues working for the medicine, yeah, make the world better.
Literally making the, and that's actually quite brilliant. And a lot of times people go into all types of ventures, especially entrepreneurs or people who feel, no, I need to start a business of some sort. And as opposed to looking for the problem that they're going to solve, they kind of just gravitate to where is the money currently, and I want to get a foot in the door before that well dries up. And this approach now, not only, it's not something that should only be applicable to the business world, but so correct that, oh, someone says they can't hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we
Okay.
can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. So from that perspective, looking at how to solve challenges, as opposed to making these amazing advances in technology, which have no practical application, somewhat finding the need, just as you've expressed. And I guess that's how, and what you were describing is augmented reality, playing a practical role, not just for entertainment and video games, but into problem solving and things like that. Am I correct?
Let me give one example.
Okay.
Paulina, can you bring me the Tony box and some Tonys? And maybe that's possible, Detlef, that you arrange that I can switch off the camera. I would give you an example, and the Tony box too. Detlef, can you arrange that I can switch off my video? What a pity.
I made you now a co-host.
Okay, perfect. So that is perfect, Detlef. Around 15 years ago, had a nice project with the Jewish Museum in Berlin with some of my students. And we designed a box where you can have an information about kosher gummy bears, about a keeper, about prey counter, and so on. So we placed that on a little box with a hidden computer, and then there's coming a story about that. Just an application for the museum. And one of my students being involved in that group was in a company designing the Tony box in Germany. And what you can do, switch on and switch off, and then you have the or take someone else, and that is this one.
It doesn't have some contents, this one.
Yeah. So that means, okay, now we have the mouse. Place the next object.
Can you make a little bit louder?
So design from our ideas of the future, from our little prototypes for the museum, start a company, be successful, and design a real product with services and sell it not only in Germany, and you see it just here in Namibia, you can buy a Tony box. So, and that is for me a real success story. Right. Educate the students with real projects, with real problems from a museum, from a concert hall, and then think behind, what can we do with that knowledge? So, and that is now also a little piece of art. That is entertainment, Benjamin the little elephant, for kids. Also, kids can consume art and culture.
That's right. Well, thank you very much. That really helped put things into perspective and to give a clearer picture and not just have to use our imagination. Thanks for that demonstration.
So, can I just interrupt?
Yes, please.
Because I, as you see, I found a workaround with the camera. The original setting I can't change during the session, but I can make the people they talk as a co-host. So only I'm allowed to have two co-hosts. So the one will be you, and the one at the moment, Mr. Sieck. So if somebody else would like to switch on the camera, then I give the co-host to the person who is talking.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Detlef. Hamutenya, now I want to come back to you. We had touched on the fact that some institutions were able to, have digital resources before the pandemic, and it was an initiative that they had already began. What I would like to find out is what sort of initiatives or solutions or innovations or approaches did you take in order to address the challenges the pandemic made that were not from before the pandemic? Was there a way that technology had come in and helped things out? And how effective was it to roll out? Because you did mention the challenges of network and internet in rural areas, for example, and not all the students having access to devices. How did you go about trying to, mitigate and sort some of these challenges out?
Okay, thank you. I would say that there was actually no easy approach to this pandemic. It's trying and errors, and every now and then you have to try something new. And to be honest, nobody really knew how tomorrow was going to be like. So every day is like a new day, and you are really looking forward to say, what am I going to be doing today to ensure that people have access to information? But I'm happy to say that our members were very proactive, and they have drawn up responsive plans or service charters, to redefine the services, ensure that public members are provided with access to quality information, even during the closure of library. So the initiative that I would say, and I've said that already, is that we have really been promoting the use of electronic resources, and we have been trying to guide people with different sites of where they can get quality information than just using the normal Google. So we have also been now communicating on different channels, either social media platforms, websites, and the students at the university, the student representative councils were really handy on ensuring that other students know where to get information. And they have really been communicating to ensure that, nobody's left out. So the user guides that were also developed really helped students, because we have realized that most of the students were very comfortable to get the very basic of information. But then we have tried to develop user guides that will help them to get in depth with their research. So those were the things that were made, and the use of also emails were used more, because in the past the student can go to the library and do whatever they do. We don't really communicate much on online, but this time that they were not there physically, we have to find them somewhere, so that education continues in absence of open libraries and archives. So those are things that we have really been working on.
I actually have to admire that, because it was, again, like you mentioned, your team was, or the people were very proactive in the sense that they were able to pivot and make the best out of whatever resources they had. It wasn't a matter of, oh no, we don't have augmented reality and so on and so forth, but even the repurposing of things that were part of our everyday life. We are all on social media, and now we can repurpose it into accessing our education. So I that was actually quite brilliant, as well as repurposing the roles. Like, for example, the Student Leadership Council, they never had to deal with how do we solve the issue of making sure that everybody gets information, because the way it worked, people were always on campus. But all of a sudden, they're thrown into the deep end, and they have to think bigger than their portfolio had to before in terms of giving access to information.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Wonderful. Patrick, the question I want to ask you as well is, so what was technology's main role in in resolving some of the issues that you had brought up?
Well, I think the first thing is, once we were able to get the COVID Art and Culture Relief Fund, the reality was there was a lockdown, right? And so even from a secretariat perspective is, can a public institution function remotely? And so we had to acquire the digital tools. So additional laptops, we had to get people modems, so that just the functionality of a institution remotely, particularly a public institution, that was the first achievement that it allowed. It allowed the Secretariat to function remotely and to continue doing the work that it did in terms of our mandate. Second was we had to constitute a jury. And in the jury, we had 4 members from government, Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Art, Department of Arts, from the Art Council, we had 2 members, and then 3 of our other members on the jury were selected through a public voting process that happened via the use of digital platforms. So the public were able to, really decide who they wanted to have as part of the jury in deciding the dispensation. And I think that's a huge precedent that sometimes goes unnoticed, and how digitalization can also allow for greater democratization in making sure that people have a voice in who the people are, in selecting who gets the funding, and therefore also, I think, legitimizing the process a little bit, even though it's really difficult sometimes because there are also vested interests that sometimes are portrayed, through this public popular process. The other thing was it allowed then the whole jury process to take place remotely. So the jurors met every second week via online platforms again to make the decisions. The application process was interesting because people could do online applications. And then the question of digital inclusion obviously comes in here. How did people in remote areas? So what we did is, because we have art extension workers, about 48 of them that are positioned throughout the country, we provided them with information that they work in the communities. They would go to the people, get the application, send it in, and we would upload it at the council. So I think what's important here is that just because you're using a digital platform, that's not the panacea for inclusion, that you still have to maintain direct contact with people and see how do you almost like convert their physical information into a digital and upload it. So we did that. Also, we contacted the various regional councils and the information was collected via that and then uploaded by us for the access of the jurors. So that again was through the use of technology, basically all around, from the application process to the selection, to the decision making, to even the promotion and the marketing of who the recipients were. We used social media platforms for that to engage the public. So technology, I think, was the vehicle that ensured us to be more efficient and also cost effective in many ways.
Yeah, it's amazing how some of those tools were there beforehand, but we never actually considered them to be a solution to things like cost. Like you mentioned, people didn't have to travel such great distances, and you could actually do it from the confines of wherever you were spending your lockdown. Out of all of those, Patrick, what would you say is your most heartwarming experience? So we're moving away from, the processes and things like that. What human story out of the pandemic and out of the role technology played, what moved you? Was there an awe-inspiring moment, something that made you
yes, I think I think it's almost like let me talk about it in a paradox. And so also in terms of, I think accountability and transparency in this process, particularly of the grant, but also what you're talking about. I'll give you an example. The National Art Council was requested by the State House to provide almost like a gift register, right? Like, how do we, if we have national functions, if we want to buy gifts for public institutions, how do we have a centralized place? We were like, okay, let's centralize it. But what we realized easily is, how will we know what's on the market right now? So let's outsource the marketing and the function of this. And the council made a decision that later on led to the Craft Center, which hosts about 40 women who are, startups and small scale entrepreneurs, to kind of create an e-commerce website. And I think what happened from there was accusations of corruption towards the council. And the story, I think, is significant in the fact that the question was, why was there 100,000 given to for a website? And I think in the digital kind of awakening, it's almost the variance between understanding really the ecosystem. So, thinking of a place like Amazon and realizing that Amazon, even though you use a website as a tool, is really an e-commerce platform. So Amazon finds the suppliers, Amazon markets the products, writes a copy, takes pictures. Amazon goes in and profiles, the suppliers of this. Amazon makes sure that the people who order these things actually receive it within a timely manner, and that there is safe and cybersecurity issues around payment systems that have access to it. And so I think the heartwarming human story is that the investment that's required to actualize an ecosystem is as heavy as building roads, right? It's as heavy as building bridges. It's capital intensive investment, and I think the narratives have got to be that if we want the things that we haven't had, we have to put the investment in. We can't think about an ecosystem that is digital and not necessarily understand what that environment entails. And I think the story is almost sad because it talks to how we misunderstand the inputs that are required to have an effective ecosystem. But I think why I told the story is to also say that the legitimacy of the decisions that have been made and what we invest in are accelerated at times by things like the pandemic. But a lot of these decisions are there. And I think what it is the demand side of it. How do we get people to purchase these things online when they're used to going to the craft center, for instance? But they are, at lockdown. So I think that's the sad human interest story. Sorry, Harry, for being realistic about how sometimes questioning the readiness or our preparedness to embrace what Professor Bourqua talks about. He doesn't talk about the fourth IRs, he talks about human revolutions. And he says we need to be careful at times because at first we made tools, and then that was the first human revolution. The second one was we made tools for tools. And then the third one was we made tools for production. And now the fourth one is that we might be the tool. So I think it's interesting to understand the very kind of the burns and the warmths of digital interventions.
That's very, very interesting. And what I pick up from that is not only does it, bring out certain realities, well, I think that's the point I'm going into. It also it just doesn't let you see things on the surface. It also gives a deeper look to some of the things that people might have taken for granted. For example, like creating that e-commerce ecosystem. As sad as it may be, I think, being the optimist I am, it's a step in the right direction. Actually acknowledging that, wait a minute, this is a challenge that has not been properly addressed or adequately been invested into. And from that angle, I'd like to say, if we learn our lesson from that and move forward, I think some good things are up ahead. Hamutenya, the question I want to ask you, I also want to ask the same thing I asked Patrick Sam, and hopefully, I hope Jürgen is paying attention so that maybe they might come up with another solution that is tailor-made both for the information sector as well as for arts and arts, culture, and heritage. So, Hamutenya, what were some of the most frustrating challenges that you faced, even though technology stepped in and things seemed to be moving? What were some of the speed bumps or roadblocks? And then on the flip side of that, what are some of the big wins that you would say that really helped through the pandemic?
Thank you for the question. I think some of the challenges that we have faced, one is that the digital skills of public members is not up that level. So you'll find people still struggling to find their ways around. So we still need people to be maybe trained digitally for them to maneuver the systems very well. And the second thing was that during lockdown, for example, the internet connection was very slow.
Yeah.
You know, everybody was at home, everybody was doing something on the internet, and you get very frustrated if you cannot even open a page that you want. So infrastructure-wise, I think as a country, we were not ready. And now with some institutions like the National Archives, we have so many records that of yesteryears, and all of those records are not available digitally. So for the researchers or historical researchers, for example, they couldn't get all the information that they want. So the only information that they can get is what we put online by that time, and what is available digitally. But then the whole collection that is not digitized, it was not accessible. Like I said, people in remote areas, and I felt really pity for the learners deep down the villages. It's a pity. I even look at my own siblings or younger ones at home that, you know, they are staying with the old person. There's no smartphone at home, yet everything else is made. We are talking about e-learning, but how can these children now have access to the resources that the teacher is supposed to teach if they don't have smartphones and the internet connectivity is not so well? Resources also to buy data is not there. So it was a whole lot and more that one can think of a student somewhere who cannot have access to those resources. So information, we say information is a human right, but then we need that vehicle to make sure that, you know, everybody is on board and everybody is able to move from one point to the other, you know, when it comes to access to information. So those are some of the challenges that I can say that we have faced during that period.
Do you feel that the revelation of these challenges, again, like you mentioned, that information is a human right, and the fact that it's not accessible as widely as it should be, do you think it has put some form of urgency in spreading the accessibility of information?
Yes, I think it does, but the unfortunate situation also, it comes to the resources funding wise, and also just making sure that the infrastructure is there in a blink of an eye. It was not possible, but right. You know, like various stakeholders have come up with different initiatives to make sure that, you know, a learner is able to get information from the teacher, students are able to do ABCD, a normal public member doing research is able to also have access to that information. But we still, I think as a country, we still need to make sure that, you know, funding is made available to make sure that digital content is enhanced and we have access to that digital content. And then just to make sure also that the infrastructures are there at all regions.
Great, now thank you very much. Seeing that we only have about 8 minutes left, very, very quickly, each and every one of you, I'm going to ask one question. And if you could just tell us, and we'll start with Jürgen, then we'll go with Hamutenya and end with Patrick Sam, and then Dietlef, just to summarize everything. So the question that I would like to ask all of you, and to answer it as briefly as possible, as concisely as possible, is from your experience, and you know, in your field and what you've seen and how things have worked out, what is the main lesson that you would want Namibians to take away in terms of the digitalization of information, art, culture, and heritage?
Okay, Harry, for me, it's a little bit difficult to give my impression from Namibia, because during the lockdown, I was in Germany and not in Namibia. but I had some teaching in Namibia, of course, online. And the lesson I learned together with my students, there are a lot of problems, there are a lot of difficulties, but we are able to manage that. There is a big enthusiasm to help each other to solve the problems. For example, if there is one student has not good enough internet at home, the student was invited from a colleague, please come to my apartment, I have good internet. The restaurants and some cafes here in Namibia, they open their Wi-Fi access points so that students living in Katatula can go by taxi in front of the cafe and use the Wi-Fi hotspot to take part in the classes. The artist, and that is Germany, because I do not have the experience about that
Right.
what is going on here in Namibia. They find out new ways to bring their piece of art, their culture to the audience from different perspectives. For example, the living room concert from the orchestra of the Concerthaus Berlin. So they were not on stage, they were at home, and you can listen to 5 people playing at the same time the same piece of music. So there was a special guided tour by the director of the museum, and that was streamed online. So that was not only out of the box, that was real, digital and real, and you have to go to a live event and you have to be in time, and that's important. So that means a lot of difficulties. We find solutions, and we did find new approaches to sell the art and the culture.
Wonderful. I'm sure there's a lot of that we can take away from the way it happened in Germany, even in a Namibian context. Sorry about that. Thank you very much for your time, and we really appreciate your input. Hamutenya, what would you say is the main takeaway from everything that had happened from your side?
I would say that digital divide is real. Mm-hmm. And as a country, we need to work hard on ensuring that no one is left out. And I will also say that the institutions that are mandated to provide access to information need sufficient information technology, equipment and infrastructure, as well as reliable internet connectivity. And we also need to develop programs that for library and archive staff, and as well as for the users on digital skills, because these people can only make the best out of technology if they have technology know-how. So there's much yet to be done, but then there's more greater opportunities now more than ever, because people will join lots of webinars that have been organized everywhere else. So I think with that, we are able to develop our skills in different areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for taking some of your valuable time to come and share with us. Patrick Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. I think there's been a kind of framework particularly developed by the International Federation on digital ecosystems, and what are the kind of key facets that allow this enabling environment. One is we need to consolidate the economic sustainability of the digital value chain. And so, you know, that talks to the issue of infrastructure, financing, skills development, you know, having hubs, public access. The second part really looks at, we need to support experimentation and develop essential skills and knowledge. And I think that's what the professor's talking about, how they're supporting experimentation in allowing kids to tell digital narratives around their culture, and culture essentially being the way we live or the expression of the way we live. And then thirdly, we need to protect and promote the visibility of diverse digital culture. So, you know, a lot of the times musicians might think that, like, you know, they need to have access, but a lot of the times people like dancers, cultural practitioners, visual artists, you know, they also want visibility. So we need to ensure that there's diverse digital culture that's being preserved. Fourthly, we need to guarantee digital inclusion for all our stakeholders. And I think that's what we're talking about also, how there is a lot of exclusion, because primarily what we forget when we talk about digital culture is that you need the skill and the tools, right? So if we live in an unequal society like Namibia, the sector can reproduce these inequalities. And so only people with privilege can kind of get the benefits of what is being provided in the digital landscape. And so digital inclusion becomes a key facet, and guaranteeing that becomes important, particularly for public institutions to target the most vulnerable and the most marginalized. And in that way, we will also be doing the fifth thing, which is like defending fundamental rights. And then 6, we will strengthen the digital data and analysis ecosystem. I think it's important for people to understand the power of things like metadata. As a country, we need to speak about where do we store our even the archives, like on what servers are they? And if there's geopolitical tension between these countries that we store our servers on, do they have then control? You know, so there's huge political kind of geopolitical issues that need to be discussed. 7 is to implement effective systems and internal processes, I think, in institutions. And lastly, we need to foster collaborative approaches. And I think one of the things in terms of a tangible action from the Art Council's perspective is that we're embarking on doing a digital transformation and creating an ecosystem where not just the Secretariat, but not the Council, but also our members are able to benefit from kind of a continuous professional development, and they can access services digitally through the intervention that we're planning. And I must say that maybe we should approach the institutions like NASC for a possible partnership to kind of ensure that there is collaboration in creating these ecosystems.
Yeah. Yeah, if one thing has definitely been prominent is a lot of not just innovation, but a lot of collaborative efforts as well proved to be quite fruitful. And thank you so much for all of that insight, Patrick. It's highly appreciated. A lot to think about, but very necessary. And I just want to say thank you very much once again to each of our panelists. It's been such a pleasure, and I trust we'll have a conversation soon. And I'd like to hand right back to Ditlev from the Goethe-Institut.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harris. Thank you very much, the panelists, Jürgen, Hamutenya, and Patrick, for this interesting panel discussion. I remember that the panel discussion will be available again for those they could not join us live. On our website, it will be soon during after the end of the conference, it will be published. And yeah, I haven't got much to add except the next event of our conference will be Women in STEAM, with a talk of Professor Dr. Katarina Simbeck, and that explores the reason why women are underrepresented in the most STEM and discuss measures have been taken in Namibia. Very interesting subject. And please share the link from our website on www.goethe.de/Namibia to register to the Zoom meeting. Thank you very much, and see you Monday, 11 o'clock.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.